The cold autumn wind carried the scent of approaching rain as Patience Daniels stood on the edge of Whispering Creek, her white wedding dress billowing around her like a ghostly cloud, her eyes fixed on the broken bridge that spanned the rushing waters. She had been waiting for 6 hours, and still, there was no sign of the man who had promised to make her his wife. It was 1876, and Patience had traveled all the way from Boston to the Montana Territory to marry a man she had corresponded with for 2 years. Theodore Wilkins, a banker who had painted pictures of prosperity and comfort in his letters, had arranged for her to arrive on October 15th, where they would be married by the town preacher before crossing the bridge to his home on the north side of the creek. But Theodore never came. As the day waned, dark clouds gathered overhead, matching her increasingly gloomy thoughts. The townspeople who had initially waited with her had drifted away one by one, offering sympathetic glances and awkward reassurances that perhaps Theodore had been delayed by business. "Miss, you ought to come back to town before the storm hits," urged Mrs. Holloway, the innkeeper's wife who had been kind enough to house Patience upon her arrival 3 days prior. "Whatever's keeping Mr. Wilkins, it ain't worth you catching your death out here." Patience shook her head, the pearl pins in her carefully arranged auburn hair coming loose with the motion. "He promised he would come. Perhaps there's been an accident. I can't leave until I know." Mrs. Holloway sighed, patting Patience's arm. "Suit yourself, dear, but my Henry says that bridge ain't safe. Half of it washed away in the spring floods and nobody's fixed it proper. Even if your man comes, he won't be crossing there." As Mrs. Holloway departed, Patience felt truly alone for the first time since arriving in this rugged territory. At 22, she had given up everything: her position as a schoolteacher, her small but comfortable apartment, her few friends, all for the promise of love and a new beginning. Now she stood abandoned, a bride without a groom, in a place where she knew no one. The first drops of rain began to fall as Patience noticed movement on the far side of the creek. A rider approached, but even at a distance, she could tell it wasn't Theodore. This man rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders cloaked against the weather, his horse moving with confident strides despite the deteriorating conditions. He stopped at the edge of the broken bridge, studying the damaged structure. The middle section had collapsed, leaving a gap of about 15 feet between the two remaining parts. No carriage could cross, and even a horse would find it treacherous. To Patience's astonishment, the stranger dismounted and began leading his horse carefully onto the remaining planks. The animal balked initially, but the man spoke soothingly, stroking its neck until it calmed. With careful precision, he guided the horse to the edge of the gap. "Sir," Patience called out, alarmed. "The bridge isn't safe." The man looked up, seeming to notice her for the first time. Even from a distance, she could see his surprise at finding a woman in a wedding dress standing alone in the gathering storm. "I can see that, madam," he called back, his voice carrying across the rushing water. "But I need to cross, and this is the only way for miles." Without further explanation, he backed up several paces, then with a commanding word to his horse, urged the animal forward. The powerful beast gathered itself and leaped across the gap, landing with a thunderous crack on the other side. For a heart-stopping moment, Patience thought the remaining planks would give way, but they held. The man followed, taking a running jump that seemed impossibly long. He caught the edge of the planking with his hands, his body dangling precariously over the swollen creek, before he pulled himself up with impressive strength. Dusting himself off, he led his horse the remaining distance and stepped onto solid ground near Patience. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with weather-browned skin and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Noah Calloway at your service. Might I ask what brings a bride to this God-forsaken spot without company or carriage?" Patience straightened her spine, determined not to cry in front of this stranger despite the lump forming in her throat. "I'm Patience Daniels. I was to be married today, but my My fiancé hasn't arrived. Noah Calloway's expression softened. I see, and you've been waiting here how long? Since midday, she admitted, aware of how foolish it must sound. The rain began to fall harder and Noah frowned. Miss Daniels, no man worth marrying would leave his bride waiting in a storm. Allow me to escort you back to town. But if he comes, Noah interrupted gently, he can find you somewhere warm and dry. A man who truly cares would want that. There was something in his direct gaze that made arguing seem pointless. Patience nodded, suddenly aware of how cold she had become. Noah removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders before helping her onto his horse. He climbed up behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. As they rode toward town, Patience found herself leaning into the warmth of the stranger's chest, grateful for his timely appearance and kind manner. She didn't know then that the man who had crossed the broken bridge would never leave her side again. The town of Whispering Creek was little more than a collection of wooden buildings strung along a muddy main street. By the time Noah and Patience arrived at the Holloway Inn, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt roads to rivers of muck. The few townsfolk hurrying about their business cast curious glances at the bedraggled bride returning with a stranger rather than her intended groom. Mrs. Holloway rushed to meet them at the door, clucking with concern. "Oh, my dear girl, you're soaked through. And who might this gentleman be?" Noah introduced himself as he helped Patience down from the horse. "Just passing through, madam. Found Miss Daniels waiting by that death trap of a bridge and thought it best to bring her back." "And thank heavens you did," Mrs. Holloway said, ushering them inside. "There's still no word from Mr. Wilkins, I'm afraid. Most peculiar, as he's usually so prompt with his business." Inside, the inn was warm and smelled of fresh bread. A few men sat at tables in the dining area, nursing drinks and engaged in quiet conversation. They fell silent as Patience entered, her once beautiful wedding dress now a sodden mess, her hair falling from its pins in wet tendrils around her face. Mrs. Holloway led Patience toward the stairs. "Let's get you into something dry, dear. Mr. Calloway, please make yourself comfortable." "I'll have Henry fetch you something hot to drink." Patience glanced back at Noah, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had shown her such kindness. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the depth of her gratitude in that moment. Noah nodded, his expression grave. "I'll wait to ensure you're settled, Miss Daniels." In her small rented room, Patience allowed Mrs. Holloway to help her out of the ruined dress. As she changed into a simple blue frock, the older woman shared what she knew of Theodore Wilkins. "He came here about 3 years ago, bought the bank from old Mr. Peterson. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's always proper and polite. Lives in that big house across the creek, all alone except for a housekeeper who comes in days. Nobody really knows much about his past. He wrote me such beautiful letters," Patience said softly, sitting at the small dressing table as Mrs. Holloway helped dry her hair. "He described his home, the town, his hopes for a family. How could he simply not come?" Mrs. Holloway's hands stilled for a moment. "Men can be strange creatures, dear. Some make promises they never intend to keep." When Patience returned downstairs, she found Noah in conversation with the sheriff, a grizzled man with a silver mustache who introduced himself as Sheriff Morris. The lawman's expression was troublingly grave. "Miss Daniels," he said, "Mr. Calloway here has been telling me about finding you at the bridge. I'm sorry about Mr. Wilkins not showing up for your wedding, but there might be more to it than a simple change of heart." Patience felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damp hair. "What do you mean? Mr. Wilkins hasn't been seen since yesterday afternoon. His clerk at the bank says he closed up early, mentioned meeting his bride-to-be today, and headed home. But he never arrived at the church this morning, and no one's been able to cross the creek to check on him since the bridge washed out." Noah stepped forward. "I could ride back, take the long way around to the North Road. It would add a few hours, but I could reach his property before dark." Sheriff Morris nodded thoughtfully. That would be mighty helpful, Calloway. I'd go myself, but with this storm, I've got my hands full keeping the peace in town. Patience found herself speaking before she'd fully formed the thought. I'll go with you. Both men looked at her with surprise. Miss Daniels, Noah began, the weather is already terrible and I'm already wet, she finished for him. Mr. Wilkins was to be my husband. If something has happened to him, I have a right to know. Sheriff Morris looked like he wanted to argue but seemed to think better of it. The lady has a point, and having a woman along might be useful if the banker's just taken ill or some such, less suspicious than a stranger showing up alone. Noah studied Patience for a long moment as if measuring her resolve. Finally, he nodded. Very well. But we'll need to find you more suitable attire for riding in this weather. Within the hour, Patience was dressed in borrowed men's clothes from Mrs. Holloway's sun trousers, a heavy shirt, and a slicker that was too large but would keep the rain at bay. She'd never worn trousers before and found the sensation strange but undeniably practical. Noah had procured a second horse from the livery stable, a steady mare that he assured Patience was gentle enough for a novice rider. As they prepared to depart, Mrs. Holloway pressed a bundle of food into Noah's hands. The North Road's a good 4 hours in this weather, she warned. And be careful, something about this situation doesn't sit right with me. The journey was even more arduous than Patience had anticipated. The rain never ceased, turning the road to a quagmire that forced them to travel at a painfully slow pace. Noah proved to be a patient guide, offering quiet instruction on how to sit in the saddle and move with the horse rather than against it. As they rode, Patience learned that Noah was a former cavalry scout who now worked occasionally for the territorial governor, carrying messages and investigating disturbances in the more remote settlements. He was on his way to Helena when he'd come across Patience at the bridge. "What made you attempt such a dangerous crossing?" she asked as they navigated a particularly muddy stretch of road. Noah was quiet for a moment. "I saw you standing there in your wedding dress, thought you might need help. You risked your life for a stranger." He glanced at her, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. "Wouldn't be much of a man if I rode past a lady in distress, would I?" Something in his tone suggested there was more to it than simple chivalry, but Patience didn't press. She was grateful for his presence and didn't want to say anything that might offend him. The rain finally began to ease as they approached Theodore's property just before dusk. The banker's house was even grander than he had described in his letters, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows, unusual luxuries for this part of the territory. But something was wrong. There were no lights visible in any of the windows, no smoke from the chimney despite the chilly evening air. Noah signaled for Patience to stay back as he approached the front door. He knocked firmly, waited, then knocked again. When there was no response, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. "Hello," he called into the darkened interior. "Mr. Wilkins, anyone home?" Silence answered him. He turned to Patience, who had dismounted and joined him on the porch despite his instructions. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, drawing a revolver from his belt. The inside of the house was cold and still. Expensive furniture sat draped in white sheets, as if the owner had been away for months rather than a day. A fine layer of dust covered the few surfaces that were exposed. "This doesn't make sense," Patience whispered. "Theodore wrote that he was preparing the house for my arrival. He mentioned fresh curtains and new china." Noah's expression darkened as they moved through the silent rooms. In the study, he found a desk with papers scattered across it, as if someone had been searching for something in haste. He picked up several envelopes, examining them in the fading light from the window. "These are addressed to different names," he said, showing them to Patience. "Thomas Wilson, Timothy Williams, Theodore Wilkins, all at different banks across the territory." Patience felt her stomach twist with dread. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your Mr. Wilkins might not be who he claimed to be." Noah continued searching the desk, pulling open drawers until he found a locked one. With a swift motion, he broke it open with the butt of his revolver. Inside was a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon. Patience recognized her own handwriting immediately. "These are the letters I sent him," she said, taking them with trembling hands. Underneath was another bundle, these in a feminine script she didn't recognize. She opened one and began to read, her face growing paler with each line. "He was corresponding with another woman in Virginia," she said, her voice hollow, "promising her the same things he promised me." Noah's jaw tightened. A confidence man. "He builds trust with wealthy or respectable women through letters, convinces them to come west with promises of marriage, then disappears with their money and valuables once they arrive." "But I'm not wealthy," Patience said, confused. "I'm a school teacher." Noah examined more papers from the desk. "Did you bring any savings with you? Anything of value?" Patience thought of the small inheritance from her grandmother that she had brought to help establish their new home together, $500 that represented her entire financial security. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "He asked me to bring it for buying household items." "And where is it now?" "I left it with Theodore when I arrived 3 days ago. He said he would deposit it in his bank for safekeeping until after the wedding." Noah's expression confirmed what Patience already feared. "He's gone, Miss Daniels. Took your money and likely that of others and disappeared." The reality of her situation crashed over Patience like a wave. She had been deceived, abandoned, and robbed, left penniless in a strange town thousands of miles from home. She sank into a nearby chair, the letters clutched in her hands. "What will I do now?" she whispered, more to herself than to Noah. Before he could answer, a noise from upstairs caught their attention. Noah immediately raised his revolver, motioning for Patience to stay put as he moved silently toward the staircase. Patience held her breath as Noah ascended the stairs, his footsteps making barely a sound on the wooden treads. A long minute passed before she heard his voice. "Miss Daniels, you should come up here." She followed his voice to a bedroom at the back of the house. Inside, she found Noah standing over a man lying on the bed, Theodore Wilkins, or whatever his real name was, unconscious and burning with fever. "He's alive," Noah said grimly, "but very ill. Looks like influenza to me." Patience approached cautiously, hardly recognizing the man she had come to marry. In his letters, Theodore had described himself as handsome and robust, with golden hair and bright blue eyes. The man before her was thin and balding, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. "Why would he arrange our wedding when he was this sick?" she wondered aloud. "I don't think he planned to be here," Noah replied, searching the room. He found a satchel half-packed with clothes and papers. "My guess is he was planning to leave town with your money and whoever else's he could gather, but fell ill before he could escape. Despite everything, Patience couldn't leave a sick man to die alone. We need to get him to a doctor." Noah looked at her with newfound respect. "You'd help the man who swindled you." "I won't sink to his level," she said simply. Together, they managed to get Theodore onto Noah's horse, securing him in the saddle while Noah led the animal on foot. The journey back to town was slow and arduous in the darkness, with only a lantern to light their way. By the time they reached Whispering Creek, it was well past midnight. "Doctor." Matthews, roused from his bed, confirmed Noah's diagnosis of influenza and had Theodore moved to a room at the back of his small clinic. "He's very weak," the doctor told them. "Must have been ill for days but pushing through it. Foolish man." Sheriff Morris arrived shortly after, alerted by Mrs. Holloway to their return. When Noah showed him the evidence they'd found of Theodore's deceptions, the lawman sighed heavily. "We've had reports of similar schemes in other towns. Sounds like we finally caught the fellow, though I'd prefer he was healthy enough to stand trial." Patience spent the night in her room at the inn, too exhausted and emotionally drained to process everything that had happened. In the morning, she found Noah in the dining room, nursing a cup of coffee. "You're still here," she said, surprised. She had assumed he would continue his journey now that the mystery of Theodore's absence was solved. "Thought you might need a friendly face," he replied, pulling out a chair for her. Besides, I want to make sure that swindler faces justice. Over breakfast, Patience tried to sort through her options. She had no money to return to Boston, no prospects in Whispering Creek, and no family to call upon for help. I could try to find work here, she mused. I'm a trained teacher. As it happens, Mrs. Holloway said, appearing beside their table with fresh coffee, Whispering Creek's been without a schoolteacher since Miss Atwater left to get married last spring. The town council's been looking for a replacement. A glimmer of hope sparked in Patience's heart. Do you think they would consider me? With your Boston education, they'd be fools not to. That afternoon, while Theodore Wilkins fought for his life in the doctor's clinic, Patience met with the town council and was offered the position of schoolteacher. The salary was modest, but it included a small cottage behind the schoolhouse and meals at the Holloway Inn until she could establish herself. Noah accompanied her to the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building that would serve as her workplace. The attached cottage was tiny but clean, with a bedroom, a small parlor, and a kitchen with a good stove. It's not what you came west expecting, Noah observed as Patience explored her new home. No, she agreed, running her hand along the rough wooden shelf that would hold her few books. It's real, which makes it far better than Theodore's lies. For the next week, as Patience prepared for classes to begin, Noah remained in town. He helped repair the cottage roof, built shelves for the schoolroom, and accompanied Patience on trips to the mercantile for supplies. Each evening, they would share dinner at the inn, their conversations growing deeper and more personal as days passed. Patience learned that Noah had grown up in Pennsylvania, fought in the latter years of the Civil War despite his youth, and had been wandering the Western territories ever since, unable to settle but unwilling to return east where too many memories haunted him. Don't you get lonely? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. All the time, he admitted, his voice soft in the gathering dusk, but it seemed safer than risking my heart again. She turned to him, curious. Again. Noah was quiet for so long that Patience thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I was engaged once before the war. Elizabeth was her name. She didn't wait for me to return. Can't blame her, many didn't come back, and those who did were changed. Like you. He nodded slowly. The things I saw, the things I did. I didn't think anyone could love the man I became after that. Patience reached out, covering his hand with hers. People can surprise you. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. But Noah broke the moment, standing abruptly. It's getting late. I should let you rest before your first day of teaching tomorrow. As he walked away, Patience felt a sense of loss that surprised her with its intensity. In just a week, Noah Calloway had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Theodore Wilkins recovered enough to be moved to the town jail 3 days later. When confronted with the evidence of his schemes, he confessed to multiple frauds across the territory. Patience's money was not recovered. He had already sent it east to an accomplice, but the satisfaction of seeing him face justice provided some comfort. The morning after Theodore's confession, Patience arrived at the schoolhouse to find Noah waiting with his horse packed for travel. The governor's messenger came through last night, he explained. I'm needed in Helena. Despite having known him for only a short time, Patience felt as though something essential was being torn away from her. When will you return? Noah hesitated. I'm not sure that I will. My work keeps me moving. I see. Patience forced a smile, unwilling to burden him with her feelings. Thank you for everything you've done, Mr. Calloway. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't crossed that broken bridge. You would have been fine, he said, his voice gruff. You're stronger than you know, Miss Daniels. He mounted his horse, tipping his hat to her one last time. Good luck with your students. As she watched him ride away, Patience felt tears prickling behind her eyes. It was foolish to feel such sadness over a man she barely knew. and yet the emptiness he left behind was undeniable. The schoolhouse filled with 23 children that morning, ranging in age from 5 to 15. Patience threw herself into teaching with determination, grateful for the distraction from her confusing emotions. The children were bright and eager, if somewhat behind in their studies due to the long absence of a teacher. Days turned into weeks, and Patience gradually established a routine. She taught during the days, took her meals at the inn, and spent evenings preparing lessons or reading by lamplight in her cottage. She made friends among the townspeople, particularly with Eliza Johnson, the young wife of the blacksmith, who invited Patience to Sunday dinners and introduced her to other families in the community. As October gave way to November and the first snows dusted the mountains surrounding Whispering Creek, Patience found herself thinking less often of Theodore's betrayal and more of Noah's kind eyes and steady presence. She wondered where he was, if he was safe, if he ever thought of her. The answer came unexpectedly on a bitter cold morning in early December. Patience was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard before her students arrived when she heard the schoolhouse door open behind her. "You're early today," she said, assuming it was one of her pupils. "Please take your seat quietly while I finish preparing." "I don't believe I was assigned a seat, Miss Daniels." The chalk slipped from Patience's fingers at the sound of Noah's voice. She turned slowly, hardly daring to believe he was really there. But it was him, standing just inside the door, his hat in his hands, looking travel-worn but wonderfully, beautifully real. "Noah," she breathed, propriety forgotten in her surprise. "What are you doing here?" He took a step toward her, then another, closing the distance between them with measured strides. "I tried to leave," he said simply. "I rode all the way to Helena, delivered my messages, accepted a new assignment, but something kept pulling me back." "What?" Patience asked, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "You," he said. "The thought of you standing alone at that broken bridge, waiting for someone who wasn't coming, the way you didn't break even when everything fell apart, your kindness, your strength, your smile." Noah was close enough now that Patience could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the small scar at his temple, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for hers. "I've spent years running, Patience. From the war, from memories, from the possibility of loss. But in running away, I've missed the chance to build something that lasts." His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused. "I don't want to run anymore." Patience could scarcely breathe. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I crossed that broken bridge once to help a stranger, and now I've crossed it again for the woman I've come to care for deeply. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay this time." Joy bubbled up inside her, effervescent and overwhelming. "For how long?" Noah's smile was slow and sure. "For as long as you'll have me. Forever, I hope." Patience had once thought her heart broken beyond repair, but in that moment she felt it expand with a happiness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "I would like that very much, Mr. Calloway." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known she was seeking. Outside, the first of her students could be heard approaching, their voices carrying in the crisp winter air. Patience reluctantly pulled away. "My pupils will be here any moment," she whispered. Noah nodded, stepping back but keeping hold of her hand. "I'll wait. I'm good at that now." In the spring of 1877, as the snow melted and wildflowers began to carpet the meadows around Whispering Creek, Patience and Noah were married in the small church where she had once expected to wed another man. The townspeople filled the pews, genuinely happy for the schoolteacher who had become such an integral part of their community. Noah had spent the winter months helping to rebuild the bridge over Whispering Creek, using skills he had learned during the war. He had also accepted a position as deputy sheriff, his experience as a scout making him invaluable to the aging Sheriff Morris. Their wedding was simple but joyous. Patience wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Holloway had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of the formal veil and pearls she had worn for her ill-fated first wedding. Noah stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Patience's face as they spoke their vows. After the ceremony, the entire town celebrated with a feast in the town square. As dusk fell, Noah led Patience away from the festivities toward the newly reconstructed bridge. "Why are we coming here?" she asked, curious. Noah smiled, taking both her hands in his. "Because this is where our story began, where a lost bride waited and a wandering cowboy crossed over and found his heart." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her fingers where a simple gold band now rested. "I want you to know that I will never leave you waiting, Patience. Not ever again." In the years that followed, Whispering Creek grew and prospered, as did the love between Patience and Noah. She continued teaching until their first child was born, a daughter they named Elizabeth in honor of Noah's past and the healing he had found. 2 sons followed, strong boys with their father's blue eyes and their mother's determination. The bridge over Whispering Creek stood solid and true, a testament to the skill of the man who had rebuilt it, and a symbol of the crossing that had brought 2 wounded souls together. And though life brought its share of hardships, harsh winters, drought summers, the ordinary challenges of raising a family in the still wild territory, Patience and Noah faced them together, their bond only strengthening with each passing year. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Patience would remember that day in the rain when a stranger risked his life to cross a broken bridge to help a woman in distress. How close they had come to never meeting, how easily their paths might have diverged forever. "What are you thinking about?" Noah would ask, finding her lost in thought by the window, and Patience would smile, taking his hand and leading him back to their warmth of their bed. "I'm thinking that some bridges once crossed lead us exactly where we need to be.